our first.
Yeah.
Again, I like on most breaks, I like to congratulate the rabbi on his summer break. This time, Rabbi Freeman was like muzzle tov is all I can say. That close to making the Olympic team. I know you were at the tryouts with the Kollel, with the Kollel synchronized swimming team, and you came in fourth. One position away from making it, which is a shame.
Right.
It's those.
We have this. There's the event like there's that luge or something.
Right.
Where you have to ski and shoot.
Right.
So the one that I was in, you actually have to take a Talmud under the water, and you swim. You have to swim while turning pages of the Talmud as you go across the.
So that makes it. And again, they got beat out. Oh, by that much. It's those darn Episcopal nuns again, which I know that they're your nemesis.
Right.
You guys are making a habit of losing to them.
It's
not a good thing.
The main thing is that, and even though they have to swim with their whole line.
Right, which you think would be harder.
Yeah, right.
I don't know. Well, listen,
I'll tell you, it would have been okay, except that when my hat went off underwater and I had to go back and put it back on.
That's the problem.
That's where I lost all of my time.
Always those issues. But you know what? There's always 4 years from now.
Yeah.
4 years from now. So, I'm glad you're back, though. I'm glad we're back on the air. Tough times to come back. Let's see, the news of this week. 10 cops, 11 people shot. In Dallas, Texas, 5 of them fatally because they were white and because they're police officers. And it's a horrible thing. Again, I'll be honest, it's a horrible thing, but not completely unexpected. In fact, I'm surprised it's taken this long for this to happen, since what we really are dealing with is a situation where, and it has happened throughout history, it's a little bit more now, where a group in power, a group that wants to get power, takes the lower end of the economic ladder, tells them how horrible things are, creates a crisis, and then shows the only people that can save them are them. And that's happened throughout history, and that's how it's been a bad situation every time it happens. I think the difference now is because of the internet and the 24-hour news cycle, these things are happening faster. I mean, the situation where, and it's just totally, you create a narrative that black people are getting hunted down and killed by police officers in this country. And then the only people who can save them is the president and the people in power. And it's a completely false narrative. In fact, statistics show that more white criminals are killed by cops than black criminals, and even though more violent crimes are committed by black people. But that's not important. It's the narrative that matters, and this is what they're trying to do. And it's not just from the left that this is happening. We now have even from the right, where one of the candidates from the right says he could go onto the street and shoot people and he'd still get elected and people would still vote for him. I think we're in a dangerous time where these things can happen quicker and you've got problems, and it's a tough situation to handle. I don't know how the Torah would handle these situations, but I figure you're the expert on that.
Luckily enough, you don't know how the Torah would handle it, but luckily enough for you, I happen to come.
We got a rabbi here.
I'm here, and I brought my Torah with me and everything, and I got all my resources and all that. So, of course, we have these.
Quick question: if you drop that, does your congregation have to fast?
They have to kiss it. They have to kiss it when I pick it up. Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. So. If we have a situation that's going on, so we have these events, which really not just the events of recent times, is going back already. There's been a couple of years where they've been making a big issue out of the police brutality or people being killed while in police custody and all that, which has led to all kinds of protests and riots. And this is the Baltimore riots over the Ferguson riots over we're even losing track now exactly who and what is going on. And then it comes to the point where someone actually has decided that he's going to literally go to war against the police,
which I don't find surprising.
Right,
that it's taking this long.
This is a serious turn of events. So, what do? First, you start to look. Well, does the Torah or the sages have they addressed this anywhere where they actually have discussed the issues? And then you try to dig into it and understand it and see if that can open your eyes to getting a broader context of what's happening here. So the first thing that comes to mind, there is what we call the tractate, which is a collection of Mishnahs, of teachings of the rabbis, called the Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot. Now, in the Ethics of the Fathers, in the 3rd chapter, the second Mishnah, Mishnahs are these teachings. So the second Mishnah says, and I'll just read that here for a quote. The second Mishnah says that one Rabbi Chanina Sagana Kohanim, there was a rabbi named Rabbi Chanina, and he was a Kohen. He was like an assistant to the head Kohen. And he said, one shall always pray for the well-being of the kingdom. For were it not the fear of the government, people would swallow each other up alive.
That's interesting.
So, right. So he says, you have to pray. Not just you have to abide, whatever it is, not that you just have to be sure to respect, but actually pray for the well-being of the government. Now let's get a little context here, and it'll get even more interesting.
I guess that's an interesting statement in itself.
Right. You have to pray for them, because if there wasn't a government, meaning the government it wasn't for the fear of the government, which means that you're supposed to be afraid. When you walk out into the street, you and I and everyone else is supposed to be afraid that we're going to get busted by the government. And if we weren't afraid that we would get busted by the government, we would end up eating each other up alive.
That's a tough thought here.
Now, let's take it a step further. So, talk about policing. Now, is there any mention here of the policing? Police have obligations, police overstepping their bounds, or anything like that? Well, if we look at this in context, we will see that the government that was being referred to, if you look up the time and the era and the people who were talking, the government that they were talking about was the Roman occupying government that was occupying Israel.
That's pretty bad. That's tougher than the Dallas police force.
That's right. Now, you talk about, occupying, like they were an occupying force. Now, I don't suppose that at the time, people were feeling that they were getting a fair shake from the Roman government. Remember, this is the Roman occupying force. So there's not a lot of good feeling. The average Jew, Israelite, walking around in Israel at the time is not thinking warm and fuzzy thoughts about the Roman soldiers that are standing around on the street corners, walking around with their spears and most likely the Roman government, certainly from other stories we know in the Talmud, was not known for their fair police tactics. Like, for example, there's a famous story that Roman contingent of soldiers and the officer are driving down the road, and the officer's axle on his wagon broke. It broke down wagon. So they had to repair it.
Right.
So they saw a tree, looked about right for the axle, sent a couple of guys over with some axes, they whacked down the tree and then fashioned it into an axle. It just so happens that the tree that they cut down belonged to a Jew.
Right.
That Jew was fulfilling a hallowed custom that they had in Israel at the time. When you had a child born, you planted a tree. Mm-hmm. And when the child got married, you cut down the tree and you used the sticks to hold up the chuppah, the wedding canopy. So it was a very touching ceremony. And it was something that a Jew would, you'd plant the tree and you'd nurture it, and you'd look at it growing. Someday, just like you look at your child growing, this is going to be my wedding canopy for my son and all that. So the Romans just go over there, whack the tree down and use it for their... So the Jew who owned it was understandably outraged. Like, where are you? Where is your respect? Where is your, don't you understand? Didn't they? Clearly, the Romans had no cultural sensitivity training.
They did not have training. There's no doubt.
No one sat them down and explained to them like what's going on with the local culture. So a bunch of Jews got really upset. So he tangled it up with the Romans, and a crowd gathered. And before you know it, a melee broke out between the Roman police and the Jews, right? And there was a slaughter. And you can imagine it wasn't the Jews didn't come out on top of that one, right? So some Romans got the soldiers, got pushed around. Probably the soldiers felt threatened or whatever it is. They overreacted, and before you know it, there was Jewish blood running in the street. It's those same Jews that wrote that Mishnah that said, "Pray for the government."
Wow.
Pray for the government, even though. And I'm just told you one story. The place says, because I don't have to make up stories. When there's an occupying army, you know that the citizenry and the occupying army of the government that they lost to, they don't get along so well.
Right.
Right? So if that's an occupying army, you can certainly say, even if, let's say, certain communities feel that the police are like oppressors and invading their community and show total disregard for them, I think those Romans probably were not respecting the Jews. And yet, the Jewish rabbis say that still you're supposed to pray for the government. Because you know why? You always have to have law and order. If you don't have law and order, everyone would swallow each other up alive. And who are we talking about? We're talking about the Jews talking about the Jews, because they just know that the way of the world is.
It works, right.
The way the world is, if you can't have law and order, you can't walk out in the street. Now, do the police forces make mistakes? Do they overreach? Do they commit crimes? Yeah, absolutely. That is the way it is. So here's an interesting thing. Let's go back a Mishnah. Let's go back. That was Mishnah. That was chapter 3, Mishnah number 2. Now look at the previous Mishnah. This is a really interesting one. He said, a person should always look at 3 things: know where you came from, know where you're going to, and know before whom you stand, before the King, before God, who is King of all kings, the Holy One, blessed be He. Everyone should always know that they're standing before God. And if you do that, you'll never come to sin. So that's kind of interesting. First Mishnah talks about realize that you stand before God and everyone will be upstanding. Well, if everyone realizes that you're standing before God,
shouldn't have that issue anyway. That's what's going on here.
You don't need any police, right?
Right.
I mean, what do we need? It's pretty obvious. Mishnah number 1 says, just remember, there's a God up there, and if you mess it, He's going to get you. Well, if you
ignore Mishnah number 1,
right,
this is what's going to happen.
So, it's maybe more serious. It's saying, and we know you're going to ignore Mishnah number 1.
Right, exactly.
Right. So even though what you're striving for, what we all are shooting for, is to come to that point where we understand, where we walk out the door every day. Everyone walks out the door every day and understands. There's a God in the world. I got to be a good person. God's going to get me if I don't, and I have to understand. And I have a purpose in life. All that lofty stuff. Mishnah number 2 says, and by the way, just pray for the police force.
Because they need to make sure you don't totally destroy the world.
Because you know what the police do? It's the fear of the cop that enables you to remember that there's God above. It's the policeman who's standing there with a gun on his hip, or who is standing there on the street, like watching you as you're speeding. And it's those things.
That's the truth, though. That is the truth.
It's the policeman who reminds you. You know why I don't speed? I don't speed because God doesn't want me to be reckless, and God wants me to care for every life and every individual, myself and everyone else. You know who reminds me to think about that?
The radar gun.
It's the radar gun. Yeah. It's the radar gun that reminds me to think of God.
That's a good point.
Right.
Very good point.
Mishnah number 1, immediately followed by Mishnah number 2.
I guess that is a good alignment there. That makes sense.
Now, I'll take it even a step further, and this is, I found very interesting. Really, Mishnah number 1 really talks about this unifying idea. Remember, there's this one great God, the God who is King of all kings. And if you think about that, like the 10 Commandments up on your courthouse wall and all that stuff, and if people are taught to revere God, everything's going to be good. But you know what? You have to remember that that's really talking about an ideal world where we achieve a certain unity. until we get there, though, you know what? You're you and I'm me. There's different communities and there's different people. There's people that look like the black people. There's people who are white people. There's people of all different colors. There's people of all different genders.
Right.
There's people of all different nationalities. There's people of all different orientations. There's people of all different economic levels. Everybody different. Everybody is different. It's interesting that it says if it wasn't for the fear of the police, of the government, everyone would swallow each other up alive. It's interesting. What happens when you swallow someone up? Well, when you swallow him, then like he's not an individual. Like I consumed him. He's gone.
Right.
He's totally gone. The fact is that if we want and we do live in a world where there are lots of individuals and there's a lot of differences, if you really want to live different and you want to be yourself, and you want to be your own person, you know what you really need? You really need the police. That is really the police that enable you to live and to be different than the other guy. Because, when people are really different, it's going to be really, really hard for us all to just get along.
True. So you have to have one authority. You have to have authority.
Right. So if you really, really want to have recognition of your individuality, you've got to have authority. Authority is really, really important. And it says the fear of authority. Now, what am I fearing authority for? Because I should, don't fear the police are your friends. Well,
yeah, I agree with the fear of the police.
You have to have a little fear, because you have to fear the fact that these guys could make a mistake. I need to really try to extremely avoid them and be a good guy.
So you're saying resisting arrest and reaching for guns and things like that is not a good idea then? I don't write that down. I get confused. That's not a good thing to do.
Right. I'll tell you the truth, that one of the things, and the thing that really kind of stunned me, I still haven't figured this out. The lady, you see the video, the lady sitting in the car, the guy next to her just got shot, and she's like, "Excuse me, officer," first of all, she has she gets her phone going, she says you just shot him 4 times. I'm thinking I don't understand. She seemed a little calm about this whole thing.
That's the first thing you do.
I would be I would be totally freaking out. I don't know how, but okay.
I think the important part of the thing was make sure you got it on film first. Was the important part of it.
So I really didn't get that whole thing. It seems a little strange to me. But the bottom line is that we do have to pray for the welfare of the government, because the government maintains law and order. What that means is, not that the government doesn't make mistakes, but we have to pray for the welfare. Now, you should pray for the welfare of all other people, and I'm not writing off mistakes, and certainly if the government made a mistake and they harmed one of my loved ones, I would be pretty outraged, and I understand that. But nonetheless, we first have to, so when they talk about, there's 2 issues going on. And I believe there's the moral equivalency thing, which always comes back to this whole moral equivalency deal. Yes, there's police. Let's say police had made mistakes. Okay? Even if police have made mistakes, we first have to always enshrine them, because for our own needs, we have to make sure that the police are there and doing their jobs. Now, on the second hand, we want to try to minimize them from making mistakes. But we realize that in this imperfect world, police will be making mistakes.
Right.
We have chosen to have a police force, understanding that they do make mistakes, because we realize that without them, we're going to be much, much worse off. But we have all accepted, just like the truth is, everybody has accepted the fact, at least everyone who got in the car today, has accepted the fact that, let's say we're here in the state of Georgia. Do you know that 4 people will die on the roads in auto accidents today. It's a fact, right? 4 point some odd people.
Right.
You know, there's a certain percentage of a person who's going to die.
Midget or something.
Yeah, I don't know what about the rest of them, but 4 point some odd people are going to die today. And yet, everyone else, millions of people got on the road. The reason millions of people got on the road is because everyone sort of signed a contract, a consent that we understand that 4 of us, of the million people who are going to drive today, 4 of us are going to die. And yet we have decided to go on the road. If not, I would stay off the roads.
Right.
But we all sort of agree to that. It's kind of like that with the police. No, that doesn't mean that we're not trying to limit road fatalities.
Right.
Right. But no one is saying, like, get rid of the roads. Right. The roads are essential. And the same thing is, we can't get rid of the police. The police are an essential fact. There are going to be failures. We want to limit that. It's always the best thing. But we have to accept that there are 2 different issues here entirely. The fatalities and the fact that there are roads. It's like saying that there are police and the fact that the police will make mistakes. Sometimes the police don't make mistakes. You know, sometimes, certainly not the road's fault. Not every person who gets killed is because of a faulty road or a signage or something like that. A lot of times it's people's own fault, the way that they're driving, which is also part of the compact, is that sometimes people innocently are killed on the roads by some other bad guy.
Right.
Sometimes they're not so innocent when they're killed on the road. And we all understand that. So we understand that 4 people are going to be killed today in Georgia. We understand the fact that a couple of them probably are due to it's their own fault.
Right.
And a couple of them are probably tragically not their own fault, and we super mourn them and pray that it's not us. Nonetheless, we've accepted that, and we understand that that's the way that it has to be.
Yeah, and I guess, again, it kind of reminds me of, I think I heard one police officer's statement, which, off the record, he wasn't speaking as a police officer, said, listen, if we really wanted to harm black people, we would just stop going into the neighborhoods, because they would end up dying a lot more in a lot larger area.
Right.
So I guess it's kind of goes.
Any neighborhood they decide not to go into, it's going to be immediate pandemonium, and
so I guess it does go on.
To tell you the truth, the facts, the numbers bore this out, but in the aftermath of the Freddie Gray death and the riots.
Absolutely.
So the police just pulled back because the police just stayed out of those neighborhoods. Well, what happened to crime in those neighborhoods?
The murder rate is skyrocketed.
Skyrocketed. It was ridiculous. And then they were begging them, like, come on, police, like, get back into the neighborhood.
I wouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, I understand the point. The point makes sense.
So really, you can't compare the two. The issues that there are, like, it's like saying traffic fatalities. Yes, there are traffic fatalities, but you can't compare that to the fact that there is a road system and everyone has decided we need that road system. If they hadn't built roads, to tell you the truth, there wouldn't be. If they hadn't built any interstates, there would never be any fatalities on interstates.
Good point. That's a good point.
But it just so happened that we all decided we wanted interstates, even though we had not figured out a way to prevent any fatalities on interstates.
That is
but
true.
we all wanted it, we all accepted it, and therefore we have to understand that the system is not a perfect system. And we're always going to try to keep perfecting the system. But when the guy picks up a gun and he goes after the police, he's challenging the system. Well, that is a system that we have all accepted and embraced, and the alternative is not acceptable. Not totally, absolutely not acceptable to any one single person in the whole country.
Right.
Nobody wants that. I mean, I'm sure there are a few anarchists around that would just love to see that. But, by and large, none of us want it, because not only, it wouldn't matter how many guns we bought. We'd all have to be holed up in our houses.
Right.
We wouldn't dare go out in the street. Everyone just have to be holed up in their house, and someone have to be sitting there, like, on the roof with a machine gun protecting your family. We're not prepared to live like that.
Well, I'm on a hill, so I'm kind of okay.
Yeah, right.
I gotta get
all you gated property guys.
No, I just got a hill. I just because it's a better angle.
Right.
I watch
Do
the old
you have an
war movies.
electric? Do you have an electric machine gun turret so it can like spin around and
On order.
with your own generator?
Absolutely.
You got it all right.
Underground bunker. We got the whole thing set up.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Though. I mean, again, it does make sense. But again, I don't see the issue resolving itself anytime soon because the point you make is very logical. But logic is not the.
Our sages told us.
Right.
Number one, you want to avoid all crime and harm. Everyone should understand that they're standing underneath God, and God sees everything that's going on.
But if you're not listening to me,
And in case you're not listening, the next thing we want is police on the street.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Fair
That's what the rabbi said.
Fair enough. Right here in the.
It's right there. It's right there. You can look it up in the Talmud, right?
Okay. All right, great, good one. That's a good one to get us back into the game here.
Yeah.
Next week we're back in
Next
another
week for more.
great, hopefully not as upsetting episode, a good episode
We'll
next
hear
week.
some good news next week.
Good news.